world, children who are isolated and alone, as seen in the video where each child is on their own boat, are left defenseless. This is because childhood is arguably the most vulnerable period of a human's life. According to the article, Children's Well-Being and Vulnerability, a child is particularly vulnerable due to their high dependency on others to satisfy their basic needs. But what happens when an already vulnerable individual is placed in an at-risk environment? Good afternoon, I'm Lara Plossos.
I'm Brianna Birchall.
I'm Aubrey Anthony.
I'm Curly O'Toole, and our topic is effects of removing a child outside of their home environment. Our research question is, since the year 2010 in South Africa, what are the potential negative consequences of removing a child outside of their home environment? Our argument is the potential negative consequences of removing a child outside of their home environment are an increase in abusive conditions, a decrease in physical health, and a decline of mental health.
Removing a child outside of their home environment largely relates to the abusive conditions that children face. As stated in the article, the prevalence of child sexual abuse in South Africa, 1 in every 3 adolescents found in this case study reported sexual abuse at some point in their life. This begs the question, why is this happening? Well, the root of this issue, as stated in the article, Child Maltreatment by Tanya Thurman, is the lack of national surveillance system in South Africa to monitor this incidence of child sexual abuse. Specifically in orphanages, abusive conditions are prevalent. As found in the case study by Thurman, nearly half the orphans interviewed reported some form of a sexual abuse in the 12 months preceding their interview. Specifically, 25 reported verbal maltreatment by being threatened to be kicked out of the orphanage or through name calling. 32 received physical maltreatment by being threatened with a belt or stick to be kicked, punched, or slapped, and 43 reported any form of maltreatment. Furthermore, street children are subjected to abusive conditions due to the cultivation of sexual assault. As found in the article, Dynamics of Street Children in Africa, street children are predominantly vulnerable to being trafficked due to the lack of protection, history, and no one asking questions when they disappear, as visualized in this image. This stimulates a continuous cycle of negligence and lack of action of abuse. In part, this negligence is due to the child exploitation which occurs in exchange for money. As stated in the article, the lived experiences of children living on the streets of Hillbrow, children living on the streets are exploited by various individuals who offer them money in exchange for criminal or sexual favors. Multidimensionally poor children with little to no means for food, shelter, or safety, as seen in this image, are forced into this system for survival. This act is intensely twisted as it preys upon a child in their impoverished circumstance and lack of protection outside of their home environment, leaving them with the detrimental effects.
In addition to the direct results of abuse due to vulnerability outside of their home environment, physical health is also a risk. These skin conditions, which mainly target children, are unfortunately common in these types of environments due to the insufficiency in care provided by the residential institution. According to the article, Skin Conditions Among Children in Orphanage Centers, Amiri states that skin disorders were noted to be common among children living in orphanages, with the prevalence of 57.4%. And as seen in the graph, over half of orphan children living in South Africa end up developing a skin condition from living in these unhygienic orphanages. Another contributing factor to the decreased physical health is the fact that poor financial support causes foster parents to not be able to meet even the basic health needs of the children in their care. According to Candace Fortune, foster care grants have stopped being paid and have had a direct effect on the financial functioning of foster families, but more so on the care given to the foster children. Families who meet the basic needs of children, like food, shelter, and etc., will surely struggle to meet the more significant needs of the child. As seen in the chart of grants given in South Africa, foster care and child support are the least financially supported. This can mean that not only is their physical health affected, but their quality of life is compromised.
Consequently, children, specifically street children, orphans, suffer mental instability due to the prevalence of sexual and physical abuse that occurs during life outside of their home environment. Specifically in the statistic, street children struggle with mental instability through suicide ideation. The indicators of such, as stated in the lived experiences of children living on the streets of Hillbrow, are a sense of abandonment, social isolation, and lack of social support in their lives. Through living on the streets outside of their home environment, children begin to contemplate the idea of suicide. The overall lack of hope for a better future outside of their current state of living cultivates the thought of ending their misery once and for all, and escape per se from their intensive misery caused by abusive factors. In part, the sexual exploitation of children, previously referenced as a survival system in Claim 1, aids the decline of mental health through introducing thoughts of fear, anxiety, misery, and survival despair in children living on the streets. Respectively, the poor housing conditions has been correlation with the poor mental health of the children, and the social emotional well-being of the child depends on the environment they reside in. According to the article, Housing Conditions and Mental Health of Children in South Africa, the author states, crowding, which is commonly expressed in terms of the number of people per room, has been identified as one of the main housing-related factors that contribute to poor mental health outcomes. Noise has commonly been associated with poor mental health. The correlation between mental health and noise is larger in children, and the ambient noise in these orphanages is a consequence of the crowded living since there are so many children packed into rooms.
The plausible solutions to the enormity of this multifaceted problem are found through nonprofit organizations. One example is found through the World Childhood Foundation, a United Nations nonprofit organization whose mission, as stated in the About Childhood section of their website, is to inspire, promote, and develop solutions to end sexual abuse, exploitation, and violence against children. Specifically in South Africa, multiple projects funded by grants have been implemented. However, these projects only pertain to 2 cities, Johannesburg and Cape Town, not the whole country of South Africa. Another solution would be the nonprofit organization UNICEF, which stands for United Nations Children's Foundation, whose mission is to support the South African government, families, and communities in reducing child poverty and improving education, healthcare, and child protection for every child. In comparison to the World Childhood Foundation, this organization covers all of South Africa, not just major cities. However, because of its nature as a nonprofit organization, it relies solely on the voluntary contributions from government, non-governmental organizations, foundations, and private individuals to reach all of children. This poses a possibility of limited means.
The third and final solution would be World Without Orphans, a nonprofit organization whose focus is a world where every child is cared for in a safe and loving family and reaches their God-given potential. A possible limitation to this organization would be the financial means similar to UNICEF. However, a big difference between UNICEF and World Child Foundation is that WWO focuses on keeping children with their families by strengthening from within the family. Research shows children best develop and thrive in safe, stable, and nurturing families with the greatest opportunity to reach their full potential. And while none of these organizations can fully provide care and prevention for vulnerable children, each one is doing what they can with the growing crisis in South Africa. These are our works cited. Thank you. Do you guys have any questions?
Claire, we're going to start with you. How did the group decide to include Aubrey's perspective in your overall presentation?
Well, Aubrey's perspective talked about the foster care systems and how they don't have enough money to provide care for the children in them, and that would affect their physical health.
Okay. Aubrey, give me one specific way that your thinking changed as a result of Carly's findings.
Well, Carly's perspective was on like the overall psychological aspect of children, and mine was about the foster care system. So my portion talked for like a small portion of the psychological effects. So reading her IRR helped me really expand my understanding on how children were mentally affected.
Thanks. Brianna, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your overall understanding of the problem that you guys identified?
I think Valeria's work, specifically talking about the orphanages, had the greatest impact because she discussed, specifically in our presentation too, the abusive conditions, the physical conditions, and the mental instability. And while our whole presentation was on children outside of their home environment, mine was on children in the streets, which is so far away from their home environment, and orphanages are closer to a home environment than all the way to the streets, in my personal opinion. So it kind of was a in-between part between in their home environment and all the way on the streets of what I focused on.
All right, thanks. Carly, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' IRRs that you decided not to include in the presentation, and why?
One compelling argument we decided not to include in the presentation went into depth about the psychological impacts, and we already had information from Aubrey's paper covering the mental aspects, so we did not include that.